Very good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management. That's the exact words that you would use in your CPD credit when you put in the title on your Law Society website. Today's webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, and British Columbia. The title, one more time, is Law Office Client Management, and this webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel as early as Monday next week. If you have any questions during the session, I encourage you to use the chat window to just type in your question. Both myself and my support staff will be more than happy to answer those. And as mentioned before, if you are having any challenges with the internet audio, we recommend that you use the phone numbers provided. And let's get started. So the topic is Law Office Client Management, and like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar has this specific agenda pertaining to that topic. And we're going to focus a lot of our time and effort this next 55 minutes, give or take, around important documents, important workflows that cover the initial client intake process, like that first ever step that a prospective customer takes to work with your client office or your front office. And working through a file or a certain engagement with that client, looking at the various different documents that along the way you are required to manage and maintain, and certain documents that you certainly have to present as part of your compliance checklist when being audited and if being asked for those documents. So we'll cover what those documents are, what those compliance documents look like, and things that for you to keep in mind. So client intake, compliance documents, and then we'll certainly jump right into understanding how best you can categorize or should think about classifying or categorizing your clients so that it's easier for you and your team at your legal office to be able to search and act on a specific action that you may have to take regarding the client, whether it's a payment, a late payment that they're calling in to give you, or if it's you calling them to ask for a payment or a retainer top-up, whatever that correspondence may be. How best can you sort the customer information, make it readily available so that you, as well as your entire team of colleagues, can act on that. We'll look at important steps to keep in mind from a compliance perspective in terms of the intake process itself, the immediate conflict checks, conflict screenings that you would have to do, and of course, once you've validated or you've ensured that there are no conflicts, then you can be comfortable in asking for, pertinent information such as client ID, any identification that you want from the client, whether that's a driver's license, passport, whatever that may be. Okay. We'll talk about kind of your first major document, legal binding document, such as the retainer or engagement letter, important components of that document so that it's easier, faster, and simpler for both yourself and your clients to recognize the various roles, responsibilities within that client matter. We'll quickly discuss source of contacts, which is becoming a very important marketing document as well as an important compliance document for you to have a better appreciation for the marketing effort that your firm's putting in to get these clients, so that now you can validate the information that you get from clients against your marketing effort and really ensure there's top ROI across various channels of marketing that's working for you, right? And last but not the least, we'll certainly talk about key analytical data points that you may consider working on so that you can have, once again, a better appreciation for the type of clients that your legal firm is acquiring, and if those types of clients are beneficial to the overall health of your particular law firm, and also understanding the various different types of marketing channels that these customers are arriving from. Okay, so you now have a better picture of a client or a customer's life cycle from the time that they enter that legal office of yours until closure. And that pretty much covers the agenda for the day. So taking a step back and as to why really we wanted to showcase this particular webinar and presentation, we've done several presentations in the past where we talk about everything practice management, the key obligations that you as a legal practitioner should keep in mind as you practice, and the client intake, service, and communication pretty much become the first steps that you as a legal office take in introducing your firm to prospective and new clients, right? So we really wanted to showcase this particular part A, if you will, or like really the first step, and ensure that you're comfortable in acknowledging the various logical steps as well as compliant steps that you have to take to stay on top of the game. So if you really look at that intake process, there are a few things that have evolved with time, of course, with COVID, post-COVID, and with legal firms slowly starting to appreciate and take green initiatives. We're starting to see a lot more web, online, internet-based ways in which you're able to collect information and correspond with both your prospective clients and for ongoing matters. So in terms of professional obligations, one of the first steps that the Law Society talks about is ensuring that you have a process to record all the discussions, the calls, consultations, the recommendations provided by you, all of that in a searchable, easily retrievable format, whether that's paper-based or using a sophisticated software. So keep in mind as you grow your practice to be able to ensure that for each and every client and for each and every matter, you're able to record those several discussions, calls, and consultations, even if they are ghost clients. As soon as you've done that initial information validation in terms of the, here's my initial client intake form, there seems to be kind of a opportunity, maybe a bit of a request for information, maybe they're just flirting with the idea of a legal matter and they want more information. Whatever may be the case, that the customer approaches your legal office, one of the first steps that I'm sure you already know, and I'm just, of course, reiterating this important step, is to be able to do a conflict search. And the conflict search is a step where you as a legal firm take the information. So let's say there's a first name, last name, some pertinent information about that prospective client, and then run a quick scan against your database, against the various different clients that you and your firm have handled in the past, and look for any commonalities of conflict. Have you met someone similar to that name? Have you dealt with someone similar with that name? Could be the same address. They could have been a different party in a various different matter. So really having a better information during that conflict search and then making your decision of whether it's important and how best you move forward with that client's matter. So the first thing is to ensure that there's no conflicts. And once you've made that determination, whether you move forward with that matter with or without conflict, of course, is dependent on the justification that you're able to provide on the conflict search report. Okay? Saying, I've done my conflict search, no conflicts, I'm moving forward. I've done my conflict search, there seems to be some common elements, but I'm confident that there are no conflicts, or even if there are, here are the reasons why I think I still can move forward. That's the justification that you as a legal firm provide in moving forward with the next step on that matter. Okay? Okay. Let's agree that you've done the conflict search, you've done the client intake, you've done the conflict search, you've determined everything is cool. Now you ask for whatever information you need to move forward with that matter. So that's driver's license, passport, and importantly, a signed retainer agreement. And the reason why we talk about understanding the types of clients, the types of areas of practices that you're getting clients, and the different marketing channels is they are all hand in glove. So when you are looking to improvise and increase the effectiveness of your work and your team's work, imagine having templatized documents, retainer agreements, engagement letters based on success factors, based on the best clients that you've derived, or based on the areas of the practice that you serve as a firm, and making it faster, easier, once again, and simpler for your clients to do business with you. So a retainer agreement is the first legal document, if you really think about it, where you are now outlining all the roles, responsibilities of your firm, as well as your client with regards to that matter. In that particular retainer document, you also talk about the fees. You talk about the initial retainer that you receive or you plan to ask for. You pretty much talk about the collateral for fees, which is here are my, here's a flat fee for this matter. Here's a billable time, and this is my per hour charge, and across the other teams who may be participating in that matter. And we talk about any disbursements, so making it as straightforward as possible in that retainer agreement to talk about the fee structure, if you will. And the last component of that fee structure really is also the aspect of invoicing, where you clearly talk about, this is the cycle in which the client should expect invoices from your firm. And there could be various different cycles. There could be as and when it happens. So you have essentially a retainer agreement which says, hey, as soon as I've done work, even if it's a half-hour initial client meeting that I'm going to charge you for, I am going to now immediately generate an invoice and send you for that. If you have money in the trust account through a retainer, then, of course, invoices become an important step for you to communicate to the client saying, now that I've put this effort in, I'm going to be moving money out of trust to general, right? So it does serve both purposes. The purposes of you waiting for payment or the purpose of where you're communicating saying, I've done the work and here's the money that's going to be withdrawn out of that initial trust fund. And the last aspect that the Law Society talks about with regards to client intake, communication, etc., is what if this matter did not go any further? So what if there's an aspect of non-engagement? The client may decide to non-engage. You or your firm may decide to non-engage. So having best practices in terms of the document. So of course you need a non-engagement letter that clearly articulates that your responsibility with that matter ends and that you're no more responsible for anything further with regards to that matter. Very, very important to have that non-engagement template readily available if for whatever reason you decide to not move forward. Yeah. So keep in mind those top 5 aspects of the initial client intake, moving into the matter, sometimes into non-engagement. We'll take a quick sidestep really to explain a little bit more on the retainer. Not so much to explain, but really discuss, if you will. And most of these webinars, unfortunately, become a monologue. And that's why I encourage you to use the chat window to really communicate here and have a dialogue if you have any feedback on these various aspects, right? So from a retainer perspective, one of the things that we've often seen with our clients and often seen when discussing with leaders in the space is ensuring that the nature and scope of matter really is very clear, crisp, easy to understand, of course. You don't want to get lost in legal lingo, though you are a legal firm. So you want to put yourself in your client's shoes to ensure that they can understand this, they can better appreciate the work being put in, and they can certainly understand what their responsibilities are clearly, right? So you don't want to confuse them beyond what is needed. So ensuring that the scope of matter is crisp, straightforward, most definitely outline client responsibilities. That was an area, a gray area that we found a lot of our old agreement letters that we used to work with our clients did not necessarily articulate the client responsibilities, saying, if you don't pay me on time, these are the consequences, or if you do not correspond on time, because everything is time sensitive, and time is money, and if you don't do this in time, then of course these are the consequences. Yeah. So really ensure that the retainer or engagement letter has a section which talks about client responsibilities. Method and frequency of communication. So post-COVID, of course, this has become very important, especially if you're using web-based tools to correspond with your customers. So whether you're making Zoom calls or Skype calls, if you're using email correspondence, of course, that's been happening for a while now. But in the retainer agreement, reiterate or revisit these documents to reiterate the importance, the risks, rewards of these types of tools. We've seen often with the COVID situation, real estate engagements being done on Zoom calls where lawyers may actually see a client sign documents live through a Zoom meeting or WebEx or Skype, whatever may be the case. Yeah. So the retainer agreement should talk about that you are utilizing these tools for conveniences, for the sake of safety, and those are the rewards, of course. The risks, of course, is this is a web-based tool, and you really want to read the terms and conditions of these various tools that you use. The last gray area that I want to really highlight is the termination details. So what does it take to terminate this particular agreement that you have? And it has to be a two-way street. So where and at what section or at what time, if there are certain rules and policies that you have as a firm, this is where you iterate them clearly in that retainer agreement. So that before the client can actually sign the dotted line, that they clearly know what they're getting into in working with a firm as yours. Okay? Awesome. So we've done the client intake, we've done the conflict search, we've created the matter, or rather we've actually done the retainer agreement, and let's say you're almost there to create the matter, or you've created the file. The Law Society now talks about, ensuring that you as a legal firm have taken some important steps. And I'm sure most of the firms do this because through experience, knowing what they are doing through time and effort and various experiences that you as a team bring in. But as a process that covers the entire legal society, the Law Society talks about important documents that they may ask for in an audit, just to give a glance for the approach you as a firm take in managing client information and how you use it to determine moving the next logical steps in that client workflow. So for example, the Law Society compliance documents list anywhere from the client ID verification document. So there's a template provided under the bookkeeping guidelines, which has a really nice template which says, what documents did you review to validate that this person was truly her or him that they were talking about, or maybe a corporation. If you're dealing with a company, what documents did you review? So the client data verification document is a template, and we'll go through that real quick at the end of the session. If you don't have a client intake form already available, there is certainly a really nice template that the Law Society provides. It's a basic template. I'm sure you can work out of that template, but it has important information that you still need to capture as part of that compliance. Okay? So here's the first name, last name, and you can ensure that certain fields are important to you. Maybe some fields are not important to you. So as part of that intake form, you want to keep in mind all of the details that you want to ask for before you move forward with the interest. Especially if you've upgraded to having web forms. This is something we're starting to see, and maybe a little bit of a tip is ensuring that certain fields are mandatory, right? So, and because you don't want people to send you junk information either. So it's important that you have, if you're especially utilizing web forms, so maybe on your website, or maybe you've created a web form and you're sending that link over to your prospective clients to capture that initial information, make sure that, for example, a phone number is mandatory, or an email for sure is mandatory. Maybe asking them questions like, how did they get to know you, being mandatory. Ensuring there's a CAPTCHA to ensure that this is not a robot. Because once you're on the web, then like anything else in life, there are certain risks associated with it. So if you've got any chances of malicious actions happening on your website, gets hacked, you want to make sure that that document is not compromised and you're not sometimes getting automated document requests or client-informed requests from these websites. So CAPTCHA is a great way to ensure that it's actually a human that is filling out that form, if you will. The Law Society then moves forward to review your retainer letter to really look at those important 4 or 5 aspects, and if you're covering that and how clearly it's been written out. And again, one thing is to audit you from a perspective of, are you doing the right things? But often we find that the audit also helps you learn through that process, makes you a better legal practitioner, and keeping in mind that the auditor and the Law Society also want to make sure that you are successful as a legal representation of the society as well as a business, and ensure that you've done all the right things that you can to be successful, right? That's a big part of that audit as well. Conflict checks, and we've discussed that. So there's 2 aspects to conflict checks. One is to do the actual review or check. But following that, there's, again, it really comes down to how important these documents and the types of process that you have to create these documents. But if you're using the right tools that can help you create them, I think it doesn't hurt to go really big in ensuring all the documents that are needed are covered, yeah? So from a conflict check perspective, there's also a Law Society document, and you can Google this, called the Conflict Resolution Document. So this is really a simple document, once again, that talks about who's the client, how do they get to know you, are there any conflicts? If there are no conflicts, then you just say no. If there are conflicts, what are you doing as a firm? If you still want to move forward with matter to resolve those conflicts, and have you decided to either transfer this file over to another colleague or someone else in the industry, or have you declined it because there's a conflict? So the Law Society does ask you to outline that workflow next step after that conflict check has been done. Okay, and we'll look at that as well. Source of contact, of course, the Law Society comes down if you're just being a referral source for legal work. So source of contact is a way for them to understand that, you are getting clients through legal file work being done in this firm through various different channels of work. And from a Law Society standpoint, of course, that's a document, but from a marketing standpoint, it's a great document for you to self-validate the different sources that you're getting prospective leads from too. All right, so there's this big discussion around ghost clients. Someone who's just flirted with the idea of engaging your legal firm may have given you certain information, and again, of course, for all reasons, decide to not engage, or sometimes decide to not even call back. Right? So those are the ones, the ghost clients are the ones who don't necessarily give you information, yes or no, clearly. So non-engagement is one route where clearly yourself or your client says, I can't do this anymore, we need to terminate this agreement. Ghost clients are those who are saying, all right, here's some information, first name, last name, I've gone into your web form, filled it out, I'm looking to get a will done, or right? And give you some basic information that you asked for and they're comfortable with, and then you never hear from them again. Either you call or send out an email, and nothing really happens. So you, as a firm, need to have a policy which says, how do you go about that ghost client? Do you wait for a certain time right? Before you say that this is a ghost client and you mark it, because the Law Society wants you to ensure that you still keep tab of these ghost clients. Two reasons. One is to make sure that you have an audit history of everyone who's given you information, because kind of borderline client privacy, documentation, etc., depending on how much of information you've gathered. The second thing, of course, is that this ghost client may return, and it's just a faster way for you to promote that ghost client into a client status if everything goes well. Okay, so clearly have the right steps, policies that you as a firm take towards ghost clients. And last but not the least, of course, from a client management perspective, we've discussed client intake, we've discussed retainer letters, but during the actual work that's being done during that matter's life cycle, there could be various different documents that you'll be sending your client. We talk about the invoices. We talk about maybe quarterly updates such as statement of activity. That's one of my favorite documents that I've seen, where it's clearly articulating the various different steps taken during that term. And it could also relate to the monies involved in terms of, how much of retainer was received, how much of work has been done, how much of money has been moved, retainer balances, etc. So that's very clear, both to you and the client, in terms of the audit history of money involved in that matter. And of course, depending on the nature of the matter itself, the term that you take to correspond all of this information through various documents vary. If this is a ongoing matter that's been ongoing for a few months, maybe a year, sometimes you have criminal matters that are just ongoing, then at a minimum, quarterly updates and a yearly update is recommended. And at the time of closure, so there's a logical closure to a matter. Let's say you've done all the work and it's completed. That's what you're working towards, of course. Then you have that closure with a letter along with the statement of activities and all the settlement statements to ensure that you've clearly stated that here's the audit history of everything that we've done in this matter. And through this letter, you're saying, thank you very much for your business. And with regards to this particular matter, the work is done. And of course, great opportunity for you to also talk about, in terms of marketing initiative, asking for references. So there could be other things that you send out from a marketing perspective. From a legal closure standpoint, you send out a closure letter that says your obligation as a legal practitioner for the work that you were hired for ends here. Okay? Again, I'm sure these are important pieces of information that you all very kind of know. What's key really is to have the right tools, the right best practices, and the right documentation to support that so that you can repeat it, rinse and repeat this for every new client that comes to your office in less time. And the key is to talk about less time. So the more effective, the more automated, the more validated it is, the easier, the faster it is for you to rinse and repeat this and have systems work behind the scene for you instead of you having to do it manually every time. We won't spend too much on this slide. This is a slide that we introduced because this was a question that was asked in one of our webinars when we conducted this before. As I said, this video is being recorded and will be available if you want to review it. But yes, the Law Society, how often do I reach the client? And for ongoing matters, and this is really what I want to highlight, for ongoing matters, Law Society talks about quarterly and yearly reviews. Documents that support the progress made and where you are in that matter, quarterly and yearly. Yeah. And the types of documents that you can send are right from invoices, receipts of payments, and statement of activities, one of my favorite. Certain clients, depending on the nature and scope of matter, may ask you for bill of cost. and that's something that you can cover in your quarterly updates. Certain businesses we've seen, certain corporate businesses ask even for aging report, making sure that the accounts receivable team have a better idea of payments, or accounts payable team rather. So sometimes you may even have to send out the aging report for payments made for that matter, or if it's an ongoing retainer with a prospect or with a corporate client, then sometimes this is asked on a monthly, if not a quarterly basis. But yeah, so beyond that, as I mentioned before, settlement accounts, statement of activities, bill of cost, client fee book, aging, some of the top 5 documents that are used ongoing, and you always complete the matter logical closure through that closure letter that we often talk about. All right, so now we step aside slightly away from kind of legal, law society compliance into a little bit more effectiveness and efficiencies within the firm when it comes to managing client information. So we talk about grouping or classifying, categorizing, however we want to term it, these clients. Of course, you evolve with time. If you're just getting started, you just don't have enough data to validate this kind of effort. But if you have the best practice built right in, today you have 1 client, tomorrow you have 100, that effectiveness is already put in place so that when the 101st customer comes in, you're not worrying about the workload. The more data, of course, the better it is for the results and the search results and the data quality that you get back to make decisions upon. Some of the top categorization that we came about, categorizing your clients based on the area of practice. So how many clients do you have in family versus how many clients do you have in real estate versus small claims? Of course, gives you a better appreciation for the type and the quality of clients that you are receiving across the service areas that you provide services. Okay, that's a given. And this also helps you better validate and qualify the revenue. And then if you were to take that over and compare it with the source of contact, your clients, your top clients are coming from Facebook, maybe, and a good 60% are family, and they contribute to the top, 70% of your overall revenue, which is now a good profitable margin. Then you go back to look at how best can you increase the investment that's being made into those Facebook ads to target potential family matters and clients. And that would apply pretty much to each and every category based on your specific need. Yeah. Another way of grouping them that we've seen often is through customer. Now, most often than not, when you look at the types of clients, it's really, did you represent a plaintiff? Did you represent a defendant? Not too many legal firms look at it from that perspective. But where it really helps is both conflict search as well as any court forms that you're filling out. If you can associate your various contacts as parties within your overall contact management and file management. So Joanne Smith could be a plaintiff client, could have another Smith who is a party as a defendant. So these are all different clients or different contacts, and you categorize contacts as clients and other parties. So it makes it easier for you to do your conflict search. And even during your conflict search, you can understand if there is a conflict, a little bit more of information saying, what is the conflict? This is the situation where there's another Smith who is a plaintiff. From an overall contact management perspective too, again, leaving the client aspect of it alone, there are many different types of contacts that we know you as a legal firm meet and greet and come in contact with day in and day out. So right from vendors that you deal with, that you have to make payments to, co-workers in your office. There could be the opposing representatives, the representative of the opponent, for example, that you meet, the opposing counsel that you meet quite often in many matters. A lot of email correspondence goes back and forth with these opposing counsels. So grouping them as important contacts and the types that they represent. Having a separate categorization for ghost clients. We've discussed this briefly. So really talking about ghost clients and how best to engage them. And last but not the least, again, going back to that source of referral, source of contacts, to have a better appreciation for your overall contact management hygiene. Okay? I think there's a question about what best way to send out a non-engagement letter. We recommend, so should it be electronic or should it be print? Definitely print as well if you can, but also an email, maybe stating that you do have a letter coming along the way. We recommend both. There are certain, like invoices, I guess, can be sent electronically. Don't necessarily have to send them printed out to your address, but any start and end documents, we recommend best practice to have them sent out as well. Okay. Just a few more slides. Okay, so when we talk about conflict searches, we really want to quickly talk about kind of the main procedures, if you will, that you need to keep in mind, especially if you're a growing firm. So one is if you're just by yourself and you have an understanding of how best to approach these things. The second is to really understand how you as a firm can build those common elements, those best practices across the office so that everyone's doing the right next step towards success. Of course, this comes with training, this comes with practice, and this comes with having the right tools that help you validate those next steps. So in terms of conflict screening, you really want to understand who is handling that call, so some information around who took that initial intake call, or who determined this conflict search, especially if you have multiple legal partners in a firm, then understanding who did it. Understanding, and again, could be a coworker, could be an assistant, could be a front office personnel, depending on the size of your firm. Information around the client, minimalistic information, at least first name, last name. There are certain forms that ask for the nickname or AKA name, not necessary, or AKA name is something that we're starting to see as a common data element across web forms today. So something to keep in mind. But certainly if there's a correspondence address, email, and phone. From a conflict search report perspective, all these data elements become important, right? Because you're going to enter all this information in that report saying, I have done a conflict search for this specific individual with all these specific pieces of information. I think we're pretty much in the last couple of steps. Yep. And last but not the least, analytics. Again, we discussed this briefly in terms of the overall track record of the client and the impression they leave within your firm, and how best you can learn from understanding your clients better, the types of clients across various different qualities, right from source of contact to the types of areas of practice, to the type of money, to the type of even payment days of sale. I think that's the term I was looking for. So you could have this really great client with a big revenue opportunity, but let's say in certain areas of practice there are too many defaulters, and you're starting to see that as a trend for your firm, then you really want to combine different sources of information about that client to make a good informed decision, or an understanding at least of the risks involved in certain types of clients, certain types of matters that you deal with. Yeah. So having information in your fingertips really becomes that much more important. So the next time a client intake comes and it's a prospective family matter, you know right at the top of the gate that family matters are really good for your firm because they generate good revenue, they're highly profitable, you have good systems in place, and this comes from Facebook, so maybe you are a little bit more reasonable to the fact that, yes, you have put the effort, so you should expect that from Facebook. Or maybe a lot of firms have a bigger weightage provided to prospective clients that come from word of mouth because you depend on reference business, and maybe that's a big game changer for your firm. So having this information available faster allows you to make decisions faster on the next client that comes into your office. We've seen clients use information, of course, many times all these tools are as good as their data, and it's very pertinent and important that you have a process across your firm to have the right data being entered at the right time. But given that the data is right, a lot of these tools can certainly benefit you from having, again, I repeat, better appreciation for the type of clients that your firm deals with, the quality of these clients that you deal with. For example, what is the one biggest document everyone talks about is the invoice balance, or if you want to go one step further, the aging report that really talks about all the matters, all the clients, how much they owe you, and for how long have they owed you that money, right? And again, the last thing that I'll leave you with is, again, we talk about profit margin and all of that. You can definitely break it down and get granular at a client level, but what we've seen most often is that law firms do it at an area of practice level, so they understand the revenue component of a certain area of practice, they understand the expenses involved with a certain area of practice. So certain firms, certain areas of practice may have a lot of disbursements, right, where you're spending a lot of expense, and if you don't have a trust account to cover your costs or at least de-risk the expenses, and let's say that some of these expenses don't get paid on time, they're prolonged, that goes into your aging report that you recognize it from, then the profit margin within a specific period of time starts to diminish because of not being able to recover these expenses in time. Yeah, sometimes you may have to write it off, sometimes you have to do other things to ensure that it's balanced. So having all this information in your database, it's already there, manually or as a system. Of course, if you have it within a system, then you see modern tools have faster, easier ways for you to represent all these data elements in analytics. If you're doing this manually, then of course you could use pivot tables and Excel sheets that also give you the same level of, I wouldn't say same level, but definitely give you certain analytics that you can drive information out of. Okay, so it's not so much the tool used. The tool used comes into play to improve effectiveness, efficiencies that immediately hit your bottom line. Also, tools come into play when it comes to compliance, where you want to ensure that the tool has your back as much as possible to give you the right to avoid, let's say, over withdrawal on trust accounts and things of that nature, and giving you the Form 9As and making sure that the tool is utilizing some best practices to get your compliance done. So So client analytics is something that we recommend, if you're not doing it already, something to think about for 2021 and beyond, because data is king or queen. And when it really comes down to exploring the use of software, if you're doing this manually today, is our recommendation for you to explore is first look for legal accounting software. If you're someone who's practicing in Canada, legal accounting is important because the compliance comes around a big part of your compliance. Apart from client intake and all these steps, also comes around legal accounting, the numbers, ledgers, and journals. And it's combined with practice management to make it simpler and faster. Then, of course, it's double whammy effect and best bang for your buck. Okay, with just another, actually I've done this really fast, with another 15 or 14 minutes left. Let me, as always, as part of the presentation, just to walk you through or showcase a bit of a show and tell, if you will, utilizing uLaw as just as an example of a system and some of these things that we spoke about. So here I am within my uLawPractice account. I'm logged in as a fictitious legal practitioner, Roger Moore, and we talked about contacts, various different pieces of information that you captured during the client intake. So the old school way, and still being used, is let's say that someone calls you or someone walks into your office and you're entering all of their information, right? So we look at Mr. Padre, you see the AKA name. Sometimes they ask you for the profession. And if this is a corporation, of course, you would create a company name. Or if it's an individual, you'd leave it at that to actually have it as the individual himself. Now here's the source of contact that I've been rambling about. This is an important data element. It's not mandatory, or at least we've not kept it as mandatory. You could, as part of your client intake process, to make this a mandatory field. Because sometimes at the time of intake, the customer really may not remember. They may recollect at a later time. So just giving them the benefit of the doubt. So let's go with Facebook. And let's put an address in. A correspondence address, a phone number, and you save that information. So that's a simpler, faster, easier way for you to do this if you're ready, available. Someone calls you and you're entering that data. And as I mentioned before, one of the first steps that you do is a conflict search. If you've ever created a matter, or if you've come across someone by the name Padre, this is really the first step, understanding if there are any conflicts. So as we run that behind, we talked about the source of contact report. So I'm going to look at the compliance checklist for client management, like the client intake and those sorts of things, right? So if you look at the source of contact, and let me do it for this entire year. And of course, there's various different documents that you can, or piece of information that you can print out. I mean, we allow you to print envelopes, labels, whatever is relevant. And here's the source of contact report. Through this year, you could see almost 27% of your clients coming through Facebook, another 27% coming through family, and you have about 110 that you've not yet categorized. So let's look at Nancy Brew, or maybe, okay, let's look at Jill Smee. And let's say you get to understand from Smee later on that Jill found you through a common friend. So let me type this in again. Again, searching of information made it easier. So there's Jill Smee. You can edit that information, add the source of contact, and make that information and data that much more important and relevant, more updated. Okay. Now here's the conflict search results. There's absolutely nobody close to this name, Padre Manos, but because there's a man, there's a Spidey man in our database. Of course, this is a playground account, so there's a man in Spidey man. That's the closest that we could search up for. And one of the important things is when you're creating these conflict searches is also date stamp it. That's a Law Society requirement. So you're basically saying that on the 9th of July, just today, when you ran the conflict search, this is the information I received, and you are making your next set of decisions based on this information. Okay? A more newer way in which people are starting to see is through these web forms. And what we've done is we've created a client portal, making it easier and faster for you to send more secure too. So if you know the person's email address, let's say that you know that, you create a secret key within our settings, so it's only yours for your firm, and then we generate for you this link, which you can then send to your prospective client. So let's say send this email, client intake form, and let's say you use a client intake email template. Please find our intake form for your reference, request your information, click the submit. Once we receive information, our law office will be in touch with you. So you're kind of going one touch lesser. Okay. And let's say this is the client. They get this form. It's a secured client intake form. So it's very similar. So this is in French. I'll move this to English. So similar to the client intake form that we had here. That's all the information that you're asking for. It's pretty much the same set of information that we're asking in this portal. So let's say this is Naveen, last name, Barber, Nav. Okay, again, depending on the nature of the matter, if there's work information that they provide that. Again, this is where I talk about what's important to you, additional information with the matter, need to discuss about a will. How did you hear about us? Through Facebook ads. So that's really working. Type of photo provided, if any. And again, it's important you capture this so that kind of validating this person, right, a little bit more, so that they're not sending you junk information. Okay, and of course an email. This you already know, but you're asking them to validate that if there's the correspondence address you want to use. A CAPTCHA, so that you're checking that this is not a robot, and then you're manually asking them to submit it. So this can happen at any time of the day. You're not waiting for your phone to ring. You just start to promote this web form, and that's pretty much it. Okay, you acknowledge the email addresses, concerns the best form of my knowledge, yep. Alrighty, so right away, Naveen knows that this information is entered. And from your firm's perspective, right away you get notified. So if you have this on your phone, a Gmail account, you know right away, hey, you have a new client. Naveen Barber has completed the form. Some basic information is already available to your email. Not only that, when you log into your own account, you knowing that this prospective client has entered, you see right away there's a Naveen Barber entered into the system. Okay? Of course. So with this, what we've essentially done is we've removed that step of you having to manually enter the client information. We've given that responsibility to the client, reducing, of course, the amount of manual entry that you may have to do. Now, if you want to make this better after the fact, of course, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. You can do a conflict search for this person and then decide to correspond back to Naveen in the email provided or to the address provided. But let's say you've decided to move forward with creating a matter for this client. Of course, then you move on to matter. But remember, they ask for a passport, so maybe you request that through the next correspondence. But from the Law Society's compliance standpoint, these are all the documents that you fill out to tell the Law Society what you've done with regards to this client's information. So, client ID verification. Let's say you review the passport. Let me go ahead into my Google Drive. So let's say you've done that, you open it up, and say I've got the passport, right? You file that. Client intake form. Again, you've already done the intake process, but this is if you don't have one. You can send this PDF form to the client. Conflict screening. So this is a report. This is not the conflict search. Conflict search is where you're validating, and this is the document I was talking about, is you communicating back to the auditor saying you've done the right step, you've taken all their information, the person who's taking the call was Roger Moore, responsible lawyer or paralegal was Roger Moore, this is a new client, okay? So you could say whether it's a new client or a new matter for an existing client. If there are any conflicts, what steps were taken? If this is a conflict confirmed, then what were the next steps? Did you refer this to another person or a committee? Did you decline the retainer? And you sign this information. Okay? And then there's the retainer letter we talk about. Of course, there's various different samples. Everyone has their own template that you can bring into the system or utilize when needed. But ensuring that the retainer letter is very clear in terms of those top 5 or 6 points that we discussed. The description of service being very clear about fees, the retainer involved, termination of legal services, the different tools used for correspondence or communication. This is a little bit more simpler template. any expenses and the responsibilities, so you will also be responsible, right? Now, depending on the nature of the matter, of course, if there's an authorization letter talking about that, and given the nature of the business, at a particular life cycle, you have the statement of activity, bill of costs, summary, non-engagement letter. So if this does not go well, or if you do have to not engage, then a template for that. This is taken out of the Law Society's guideline as well. Just type in. If you received any retainer, if you're going to have to refund that. But to date, we have not received any funds. That's a confirmation that we're not acting for you and will not be taking any steps. So very clear, yeah? And a closing letter, if you're finishing up that matter in style. So this is again a template from the Law Society. What we've done, of course, is ensure we've added all the information. You basically, through this letter, say that we're closing the file and we hope this matter has been concluded to your satisfaction, and any information, you can type it in here. So every step of the way, right from intake to creating that matter and closing that matter, it's important and relevant to have client information available. And at the end of the day, we spoke about the analytics, where it really comes down to. The top analytics, as I mentioned, is fee book by clients. You could do fee book by category. So here are all the different areas of practices. Family law, civil, here are all the clients that you have. And you can compare the categories, the revenue being higher with civil, about $3,000, or actually civil litigation, $3,000. You can look at the expense chart by category and to see how much of money do you actually spend if you categorize this as disbursements. Okay? So really wanted to go back to the title. Today's webinar is credited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits. Law Office Client Management is the title. And the agenda was to really look from the client intake process to the closure letter, the various documents that you and your legal firm should keep in mind and consider to produce as templatized as possible, to improve effectiveness and efficiency, to deliver a very consistent, branded, and a compliant document workflow process for you and your clients as you move them along through the next steps of working with your firm. So in terms of, I guess there's a quick question. I'm going to kind of close out here. So you can either do it through the generic forms, but if there's something specific, you can email us and we will be able to help upload that as well for you. So with that, I'll conclude. I'll bring a logical closure to today's webinar. I hope this session was informational and hopefully your time well spent. Please do use the chat window to ask any further questions that you have, and we'll spend the next couple of minutes to answer those. And once again, thank you very much. Look forward to speaking to you next week. Alrighty, if there aren't any more questions, thank you once again. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll look forward to speaking with you next week.